So here's the project. This thing here, this all looks to me like it was built in the 30s or 40s. Custom steel fabrication here in Portland, Oregon. I'm 90% certain that these are all cast iron, not aluminum. But it sometimes can be a little tricky to tell. But I'm fairly certain that is. When we see these square lag bolts and some riveting that was done here, it just looks to me like 30s or 40s construction. We're going to be copying that style to do a rim around this pool, you know, just safety stuff, because people would stand up here, maybe, you know, hang out here. This is what's called an infinity pool. You can see how the edge of the pool is like this, and so if you're in the pool, it gives you this idea that you're kind of like over the edge of the edge of the world or whatever, you know, type thing, and a fantastic view from in the water. There's a lot of times when you're swimming or you're in the water, you know, no matter how nice the area is, all you're looking at is the edge of the pool, right? You know, maybe some tile work. But here, you can be in the water, and because of the way this arrangement works, you know, you can be in the water and then look out over the view. And then we needed this to be wide enough to be a walkway. A guy gets up on there on a ladder and a walkway with a high-powered weed eater, and then get those blackberries down. And the other aspect of it is that all gets left there because they add to the security situation when you know, we want a security barrier with regards to this hill, and so it's a matter of using a natural barrier, but we don't want to screw up the view. So what we do is you know, you'd be able to weed eat the top of those blackberries. It'd be nice if you could harvest them, but you can't. And then I got to run concrete anchors and stuff for the edge of this. So this will be how this arrangement goes. But it's kind of a neat pool. The other thing we got to deal with is some finishes on here, because this pool is destined to be a saltwater pool. Apparently there's kind of a fashion thing. It's supposed to be better for health to I don't know, maybe Dead Sea salt or something you put in here to have a saltwater pool. It's supposed to be better for the skin and everything when you swim in that. So this will document this project as we move ahead. We're showing this stage of the fence project, and so these are the stakes I'm cutting out using our DeWalt using the DeWalt saw here. Now this thing is about, I don't know, a year and a half old, and I'm starting to have issues with blade tracking. I had to glue the rubber band on there because that kept coming off, and so the blade likes to work its way off these reels. They just get a little off center, but I don't know, it's an expensive tool, it's paid for itself, but it's an expensive tool, and they don't last super long, you know, if you use them. And so that's one of the issues I run into. That's one of the reasons I charge a little more for what I do now, is the tools add up, you know. So we're cutting this 1x1 steel. This stuff's going to be a bugger to cut. Fortunately, I don't have a lot of cuts to do on it. This is our rail bottom. I got to do a lot of cuts of that stuff, but I think we can do it. And then we've got that plate material. And you know, just doing the cutting today. Not a lot else we can do. The client here kind of wants us out of here by noon so they can have the home to themselves, which, you know, makes a lot of sense. And of course, one of the other things is about using a saw instead of, let's say, a grinding wheel to cut this stuff is I got to keep it low noise. The way this neighborhood is and the way that people choose to live, you know, you gotta respect the quality of life issue with a lot of things, and I'll go over that in another video. But you know, these electric tools are definitely, you know, low noise using a saw instead of a grinding wheel and this type of thing. Okay, latest project, and why I haven't been posting a whole lot in the forums, I'll stop and make a video every once in a while. But this is the last segment of our fence project on a current kind of contract with a guy. I was kind of hired to manage this side of it, but they kind of been treating me a little bit more like a subcontractor. So I've had some expenses out of pocket on this, and that has influenced some of my decisions on materials. You know, normally I'd like to powder coat it, maybe throw a little bit thicker paint on there, but when it's out of my pocket, and they bracketed what the total cost would be. The other thing is I had to fight for a little bit higher than average helper wage for my helper, because the guy is a reasonably decent carpenter and helped me out with a layout on this stuff so that we would get our spacing. If you look down this row, you can see how even the spacing is. The other thing is we had to build, level, and parallel a 20-foot layout table because the client wanted this thing to be really straight. And when you're dealing with solid material as opposed to hollow material, actually solid material is a little trickier to keep straight as you work with it. But, you know, a little sledgehammer work, that sort of a thing. 300-pound pull lock with a Stanley crowbar will get that stuff straightened out, you know, when it needs to be. I went with the top rail design. It goes on after it's built so that we can maintain a little more straightness. You can see here that this was welded onto some 1-inch wide stuff, and then we've got slightly wider stuff that goes on after that as a top rail. I kind of like that, and it opens up the possibility of drilling holes all the way through this stuff and then running screws up from the bottom into some nice wood, you know, so you could have a nice wood top rail on this, and expect this fence to last a few hundred years because, again, it's solid material. I mean, people see that stuff from the 1600s, it's wrought iron and it's still there, okay? Expect that to last a few hundred years, but the wood would be replaced every 40 or 50 years maybe, or every 20 years, you know, depending on what type of wood. But you could put a nice 2x6 piece of cedar or something across the top of that, or even a hardwood, and have a nice little bar thing across the top of that. No problem at all. And total cost to the client on something like this, counting materials, is going to vary a lot because of the way these twisted pickets go. And if we don't use twisted pickets, it's a lot less money. If I were to use some of this material, which is actually hollow, we would have had a much lower material cost on this, but again, the hollow material isn't going to last as long. Now these posts are hollow, but they're pretty thick. We went with a thicker material than the original plan for this length because it's held onto a concrete wall, and I designed and built those plates with an adjustment in them so that if the wall is not totally straight, and it's not, it's been repaired, it's probably about 70-80 years old, and it's been repaired and added to a few times, we need to have some adjustment on that. So I built in about 4 inches of adjustment play on that wall, which hopefully is enough. And if it's not, I got a problem, but I can deal with it. I have extra plates and I can put longer bolts on there. The bolts will be bearing the weight on that, but I have a plan for putting little additional outriggers on those once it's in place. One of the specifications was there's no connection here. This had to go this way because it goes over an area that they didn't want any drilling or anything on the edge of a pool. The other thing that got a little tricky was getting this corner figured out. You know, we have the upper here, the lower down there. I kind of wanted to not have sharp edges where there was a possibility of somebody bumping into it. I probably will end up trimming this or doing something a little bit different on that, but the 20-foot layout table is the only way I could guarantee this thing would be straight. So, you know, part of the cost of building something like this is getting a massive layout table built, and you know, it either has to be built on site or in close proximity. Now, this situation was that the client had a garage and a driveway we could have done this in, but his power wasn't working for some reason. So I'm using my Eastwood MiG-175 in the yard of my rental place, and I've got to get all this stuff out of here before my landlord comes back at the end of the holiday weekend. I can't tell him I turned his yard, even though he's an absentee landlord. I mean, I live here with roommates. But I can't just turn the yard into a commercial location. And when I charge basically as a laborer plus materials, or as a skilled labor plus materials, and somebody's getting a shop out of that, they're getting a good deal. My problem is I usually don't get paid for, shop, and we did one section of fence for this guy where I was just building 5-foot sections, and then we carried them in to put them together. And then we got the story, well, you can't weld here, you can't weld over there, you got to weld over in this other place. And the power cord didn't work. And then the only place we get 220 power was kind of like in just a goofy location. So, we came back, we're building this, we have to haul it over there. It will fit on the roof rack of my van, but it's going to be a bugger to load and unload. 4-man job. And that's the other thing is when you work on larger scale jobs, and they say, well, we want you to do this job, and great, I appreciate the work, but I need help, and it's not okay help when you get around to it, or else I'm on the clock for that whole time waiting for the other help to show up, or I got to bring my guys in and they get paid a certain amount of money, and I have to make sure they're going to get paid that much money, and we don't play that game of, well, you've been out of work for this long, you're more desperate, therefore it's less money. I don't want to play that with people. And so we've kind of not had the best relations with this client, and I've been ready to walk out on this, except that now I've got money sunk into the project. But hopefully we're going to get this thing installed, everything's going to be good, and we'll be all right. I'm also doing this video to document the look and the quality of what we're building. And could it be better? Of course it could. We could put more energy into it. You could hire a $50 an hour welder to do cleaner welds on the edge. But I can tell you that for me, and for what I do, it's never going to fall apart. Okay? I'll throw extra metal in there and guarantee it's never going to fall apart. The other thing is, on the most visible parts like the top rail, what I do is I slap this on afterward and we weld up underneath. See, that's all. Not, I wouldn't call it spot welding, but those are welded points on that, so that's welded pretty heavily up underneath. Anyway, I think I got a phone ringing. Okay, so here it is near the end of the nightmare. This is at Infinity Pool, so you'll notice how as I lower the camera it looks out over the city. I don't know if I'll include the earlier segments in this, but I'll include this segment here. This is kind of the way these work. It's a 2-level thing. So I did the fence railing over there, fence railing over here, and what the guy did not want was any anchoring bolts going into the previous tile or concrete work. The other thing is, if you look at the way this alignment goes, I'm aligning a lot of this with those tiles, not necessarily, not everything lines up because not everything's the same, so you kind of split the difference on this stuff. And with this, it's this box shape in the L section that holds that, so it's relatively rigid. Over here is kind of where my engineering stuff comes in. And so what we're dealing with on this is we were not to drill or cut or do anything with this lip. We had to deal with the concrete below it, and then had to go far enough below that we weren't messing around with this stuff here. So what I did is I made these plates, I drilled them, these are concrete anchors right here, and then I welded some big bolts to these plates, and by using the double nut arrangement we can adjust these nuts back and forth to adjust the tilt on this and then kind of level and straighten out that fence with that. And so that's how it was done. There was a whole jig arrangement to get the spacing in here because this is slightly uneven, but we want it to be relatively consistent going back and forth. So I made a jig for this, which unfortunately I just didn't have the camera handy when I was doing that. But a big part of this is that because this wall was different widths on here, because of when I made the original forms, that's just how that had to go. I had to make these adjustable with those bolts so that these could all work at different lengths and different widths on that wall. And then here's some of the original ironwork, which we think was from the 1920s. It was getting loose, but by making these brackets going into the old retaining wall, we're both reinforcing this handrail and reinforcing this retaining wall to some degree. And so this is the project. It was a little over time and over budget, but I took part of the hit on that. So anyway, this is the pool fence project.